element of those students at that age, university going, that propels that. And I think those are fundamental questions would ask themselves.
On this kind of rearrangement of the times, because some boarding schools have been accused of actually holding young students up until 11 p.m. in class, and them waking up as early as 4 a.m. just to be ready for class.
Yes, I want to agree with them entirely that this is the right thing to do, is the way to go. But before I say why, let me caution my brother Wamatangi. Yes. You said you normally go out joking at 3 a.m. Please, when I've said nothing, my brother.
No, I know what you want to drive because I just want in your place,
if you come to Kakamega, if you start joking at 3 a.m., people will think you are a night runner. Please don't do it.
Whenever I'm in Kakamega, actually, what I normally do is that I make sure I delay until at least 5:30 or 5.
On this issue.
On this very important issue, this the way it should be. For Wamatangi and I don't know about young Kajuang, this is how we went to school. The only variance I would like to introduce in this, they should not say it is illegal. When you now bring in the issue of legality and illegality, you are now preparing to punish somebody, probably the principal of the school, the headmaster of the school. What this should be guidelines, and heads of schools should be encouraged to function within those guidelines. You know, if you left children in their natural element, what they do is that they play. So the school rules and regulations should encourage at every turn an opportunity for children to play. In our good old days, when we were doing extremely well in terms of discipline, you go to class, at 8 you start class, and at 10 o'clock when you go to play, or when you go for a break, you break out into playing. And then at 3:30, as they have said here, again you break into playing. So children should be allowed to play. In fact, these days, if you go to the so-called academies, you find an academy of 800 people on 1 acre of land. That 1 acre of land, probably 3/4 of it is occupied by the building blocks. And they have a small balance where these children are packed during break time. The children have no time to play at all. This one, what then happens is that when they are in class, they must play. And in the process, they start being violent because they are confined, as it were. So we want to laud this particular approach, and it reminds me when teachers are allowed to operate within this framework and they're allowed to have their space, teachers make their decision. Like when you insist that this cannot be done at this time, you go to a place like Kakamega High School, where I'm an old boy. Soccer is so highly prized that, for example, when there is a match on TV, the principal of the school normally receives a request from the head boy that the boys do not want to do prep today, they want to watch soccer. And if you have this kind of regulations, then
it will be much easier. Yes, but you say you're a parent and you're looking forward to your child joining grade 1 in the new curriculum. Are you concerned by the kind of time that we see school buses on the roads? Because I come to work probably between 4 and 5, between 4 and 5 and 4:30, and I actually meet these buses picking students along the road.
That is not necessarily because of the education sector. It is because of poor physical planning. Nairobi is a mess.
Exactly.
If you stay in certain parts of this town, if you don't leave your house before 5, then you'll not be able to get to school at 7 or 7:20 in the morning. And parents sometimes are making decisions to take their children to certain schools which they think are going to post good results and are going to shape their children in a certain way. And that is a problem. And why can't the government make sure that in every locality there is a proper public school? Fred, I have a problem with private schools. Private schools are charging parents almost 1 million shillings a month. Ask yourself, is it that expensive because they're paying more taxes? No. It is expensive because they're selling class and prestige and selling all sorts of big names, English-sounding names. If I had an opportunity to influence education sector reforms, I would make private schools very expensive through taxation.
Okay.
And I would redirect the taxes collected from those private schools to improvement of education infrastructure.
Okay.
But I would also put much more money in making sure that public schools are at a level where parents can make the decision that instead of taking my children to Makini or to Riara or to the other private schools or to Brookhouse, or I can go to a public primary school and I can be confident that my child has a bright future. I started from a public school. In fact, my primary school was a Kanjo school where I did my class 8. And here I am.
Yes.
And I'm sure that the two senators will also tell you that they went through these public schools. How come today that even that parent who is hustling industrial area wants to take the child to a private school, and that private school then forces them to leave the house at 4 a.m., very ungodly hours? The government has failed in its duty to provide education. Education is a right. There are countries where you don't get private schools. I'm told of some Scandinavian countries where private schools are banned because government is capable of providing infrastructure and facilities for public schools. And secondly, teachers are some of the highest trained persons
in those countries.
I have a friend, a young Kenyan lady who went to the Scandinavian countries. She has a master's in early childhood stuff and psychology and stuff like that, and all the job she can get is to be a daycare attendant, because for daycare you must be trained. Okay. For us, who are the people who take care of our children in daycare? There are no standards. And so the argument follows that that is a county function, and counties have even failed to offer ECD. So the CS education needs to look at this thing holistically, to move away from painting of buses, to move away from single uniforms, to move away from those containers of examinations, and come up with a holistic solution and approach Parliament to lobby Parliament to allocate more funds to the education sector.
It is definitely a big discussion, the education situation and what needs to change over the last 2 years. That has been the big discussion since Fred Matiang'i became CS of Education. Even after he left, this review of our education sector is still ongoing, and of course that will continue making headlines. I want us now to move, and we've spent quite a lot of time talking about education matters. It's because it is important. Right. Let's now talk about sugar matters. And top CSs fight for survival in cabinet. Henry Rotich, the cabinet secretary for Treasury, will be investigated for opening window for duty-free sugar imports that was abused by scrupulous traders. Aidan Mohammed, who was trade CS during the scandal, faces probe because the state agency failed to prevent influx of contraband sugar. Willie Bett, former CS, is in trouble. He's now the Kenya High Commissioner to India for recommending waiver of duty for 14 importers during his tenure as agriculture CS. And recommendation also by a parliamentary committee, contaminated sugar worth billions of shillings should be destroyed. Do you think it is really down to the CSs? Because we tend to actually blame CSs a lot, quite a lot in Kenya. We always say the buck stops at their desks. And Kenyans are quickly baying for blood. We want to see people getting fired. Do you really agree with that?
It is the lawyers who talk of an open and closed file. This one is an open and closed case. The CS is the one who started it all. He gave a Gazette notice where he opened a Pandora box. If he had not done that, if he had used the normal procedures that have been used in the sugar industry, we would not be where we are. What do I mean? Usually, Treasury sits and finds out from the stakeholders how much sugar was produced by the local millers. What is the consumption nationally? The deficit is usually bridged through importation. For a long time, it used to be 200,000 metric tons. What then should have happened is that determination would have been made, and then the CS would have indicated in his Gazette notice that we are allowing in importation of sugar to bridge a deficit of so many metric tons.
Yes.
Having done that,
Yes.
he would then have specified who are going to be the ones who will be importing. But in this case, he did not mention how much sugar should be imported, and he said anybody would be allowed to import. And that is where the problem
My
started.
biggest question is, we seem to have gotten into this trend where every time something happens, we're calling for the CS to resign. And this is not the only case. CS Najib Balala of tourism just the other day said he's not going to resign simply because 10 rhinos died, and people are now already calling for his resignation. Fred Matiang'i, over the same issue, the Ruaraka land scandal that you are investigating in your committee, people are already calling for his resignation. We're already talking about an anticipated cabinet reshuffle, and people are already expecting that all the CSs that have been named or mentioned here and there should be done away with. Is it really the way to go, that every time something happens we say the CS must resign?
You know, Fred, let's also acknowledge, as we take on that debate, that the level at which our leaders, and I include CSs in that category, are willing, the trend that we have set all the way about taking of personal responsibility for actions or decisions or outcomes from institutions which are headed by our leaders. That level of responsibility, personal responsibility, has been not only low but extremely wanting. Because if you look at if you look at our history, you would probably count maybe one or an extreme exception whereby anyone ever wants to take responsibility, step forward and say, yes, this has happened under my watch, and I want to step aside. I want to first, take a back seat until this is either sorted, or I take responsibility because I should have done better. Now that is a case in this country whereby the story is underlined by one, by one example, that I would rather die. I mean, that has been the story. And you see, yes, you could try to balance the two and ask that's a fundamental question. Is this really the way to go? It cannot be, it cannot be, a panacea. It cannot be something that would prescribe for all. That's the truth. But also, the balance tilts and tips downwards to the fewer or the more inclination that we want to stand our ground, stick to where we are, and still continue to be called the leaders and the heads, even when you are wrong. And so I want to say, yes, in this case about sugar, Fred, really, let's be frank and fair to Kenyans. I mean, should this really have been happening? Should it? I mean, who carries the burden and the brunt of all this? But it is the Monanchi.
There are those who argue that in a ministry, the accounting officer probably is from the PS downwards. The CS is simply oversees some of these functions. When we keep on calling for the resignation of the CS, because now it's become almost like a song, every scandal there's a CS being asked to resign.
It's called ultimate responsibility. We hear a lot of that when you're dealing with county matters, where the CEO of the county will tell you that deal with the procurement guy. I did not sit in that meeting. But there's that ultimate responsibility that public officers or state officers sitting in certain positions must bear. But Fred, I must say that we have a cabinet that is dysfunctional. It is supposed to be a small and lean cabinet. But from the top of your mind, you can mention 5 or 6 cabinet secretaries who have been contradicting each other and who have been taking actions that do not appear to be in public interest. This matter of sugar. My county, I've got sugarcane farmers. I've got one sugar plant called Sukari Industries. I've got thousands of lives that depend on sugar. When a cabinet secretary opens the floodgates for 1 million kilos of or a million tons of sugar to come into the country, what is going to happen to the guys who are planting sugarcane in my county? They are dead.
Exactly.
So what that CS did is to kill the farmers of Homa Bay and the farmers of Migori and the farmers of Kakamega. Now, should a CS then refuse to leave office after taking actions that have killed an entire industry and has practically killed people because I've got cases of people who died. Why did they die? Because the money they were expecting from Sukari Industries did not come, and they could not go to hospital to get the treatment that they ought to have gotten. This is a serious matter. This is not just an issue of sugar sitting in supermarket shelves. This is an issue of life and death. We have seen countries where in India, the minister in charge of railways quit office because a train derailed at some point.
Yes.
Here, a minister in charge of wildlife, 10 rhinos die. A national heritage, a national pride, something that is endangered, and he tells people to go to hell. I mean, he's the one who should be leading the way to hell,
yes,
not Kenyans who are demanding for accountability.
Okay, but those who say that some of these probes, like the one you're undertaking, that probably some of them are politically instigated to get rid of certain people. And I've seen such a headline in the dailies that even the Ruaraka land scandal seems to be targeting one particular CS, and that could be political in itself. Don't you think that when politics comes in, that we may be getting rid of some people simply because a few people think that person should not be there?
You see, it is so annoying. The expectations of Kenyans is that public servants are there to serve. In fact, the word servant comes from the word serve. So when a CS goes and hangs on in there, say, I would rather die, says that people should go to hell because we're asking him to take responsibility, it means that they have forgotten that they are supposed to serve us. One man, Kenneth Njindo Matiba, showed politicians that if you are in politics because you want to serve, you can actually resign. And he resigned. Matiba resigned. It should be pricking Rotich that we are having the kind of problems because of sugar importation, purely because he made the wrong decision that opened the floodgates for importation without caring about the millers, without caring about the farmers, without caring about the 6 million Kenyans who depend on sugarcane farming and the sugar industry. That is very big. He should resign. And we are not asking for too much. And when we do that, it doesn't mean we hate him. Go to the Ruaraka land issue. I think the CS you're talking about is one, what is the name of the guy with in the yellow suit in cartoons? Fred Matiang'i. Yes.
I don't know which cartoon you're talking about.
The cartoons in these papers of yours. Yeah, Fred Matiang'i. Matiang'i is not telling us enough about Ruaraka. It is a question of theft. So people must learn to take responsibility. Kajuang, I hope that when you're still vibrant the way you are, the way I am, the way you are, you will have an opportunity to demonstrate that it is decent for somebody to resign.
To resign.
Yes.
You're looking forward to an opportunity to resign. I don't know much about that. But Kimani Wamatangi, quite a number of CSs have been mentioned. Right. Kenya Power, Kenya Pipeline, CS for Energy is mentioned. Right. Fred Matiang'i is mentioned. Right. CS for Teachers has been mentioned. CS Aidan Mohammed has been mentioned. Quite a number of CSs have been mentioned on any of the corruption-related probes that I can think of. A CS has been mentioned. We've also had talks about the possibility of a cabinet reshuffle. Now that the cabinet secretaries have or appear reluctant to actually leave, do you think that it is time for President Uhuru Kenyatta to actually crack the whip and actually send them home himself without waiting for them to resign?
Well, can I start by first declaring as a member of the Public Accounts Committee, and yes, which I sit in with my colleague here as the chair, Senator Kajuang, that absolutely not, that the probe on the Ruaraka land scandal was never, is not, and even will not be about any cabinet secretary. It is about public funds. It is about defense of the people's rights, their interest and their sweat. That money that was contributed, paid by government, the city council, that is supposed to be now helping pregnant mothers and children who want to go to school and our seniors, was taken by a few people, put in their pockets under the pretext that they were buying a land which belonged to government. It's not about a CS.
It's theft.
It's about one big animal that we have to slay and fight completely: corruption. And this started not even with the mention of a single CS. Actually, this has just come out as things have moved on. We started with this probe because we saw that money has been paid. Kenyans complained and petitioned the committee and the Senate. What is happening? This land, we know it was ours. This is what, and they brought the history. So we went into asking, what's going on? And that is the work of Parliament. It is the work of the Senate and the Public Accounts Committee. And eventually, and I want to say this really dispassionately, you know, the best thing that anyone should do at their level, whether it's a CS, a PS, a senator, a member of parliament, no matter your station in life, if you find that your name has been mentioned in that kind of probe, come forward and clear there and say, this is my role, and justice will be done.
Is that the expectation you have that
let me just
will actually use some of these indictments by Parliament of CSs to actually reshuffle?
That's what I just wanted to say, because as Senator Kajwang has his take on it, that actually I do not think that the president really needs to wait for that kind of opportunity, because he knows his job, he knows his people. And that boils down to what you had asked earlier. You know, if I find as Wamatangi, I've been appointed as a CS, and in my station, certain things have happened, why do I want to wait for the president to come and tell me to take a back seat?
Exactly.
Why do I want to?
Well, because the president could decide, okay, fine, you've been mentioned for wrongdoing in this ministry, let me move you to a different ministry.
It is his prerogative, but the president cannot shut his ears to Parliament. He cannot, because Parliament represents the people, represents the will of the people, and when Parliament is talking, it is talking collectively on behalf of Kenyans. And if you look at some of the committees that we have, in fact, in the committee system, it is not a committee of Jubilee or NASA or a committee of a partisan political party. It is a committee of the House. And when members have sat down and in a manner that is not partisan have come up with a recommendation, like the sugar report, or eventually when we come up with the Waraka report, a responsible president must find out what is Parliament saying about these issues. Parliament has many options around the cabinet secretaries. The National Assembly could do an impeachment. Parliament can censure some of the members of the cabinet. But the fact that a parliamentary report has adversely mentioned a cabinet secretary, if the cabinet secretary does not want to step aside to allow investigations, because remember that Parliament is really not final. Once Parliament does its report, it would then go to maybe DCI, EACC, and then DPP for prosecution and for judicial action to be taken. Okay. But the political court that Parliament is, because these CSs are also political animals. They are not elected, but they are serving a president who is elected politically.
And their concerns, some of the concerns are to do with the politics. That yes, politics, as you said, it's a political court that some people could use as politics to settle political scores. Just get rid of this CS because he's from the other side.
I believe that, and as I said, that the committees have got representation from across the political divide. It is usually very difficult for one side of the political parties thinking to dominate the entire committee. But a final point I want to make. If Parliament has got the last word on impeachment of the president, Parliament including the Senate. In fact, when it comes to impeachment of the Senate, the president is indicted in the National Assembly and is tried in the Senate. If Senate can be the trial chamber for impeachment of the president, what exception, what special favor then should CSs have not to be accountable to Parliament? If we can indict and try their boss, what about the cabinet secretaries? And I think this is a good opportunity for the president to rejig, reorganize his cabinet. He set up his cabinet at a time when Bonnie and I were still eating tear gas out there in the streets. Now that things have settled, I would love to see a situation where Bonnie Kalwale, for example, is given the agriculture docket so that we can see whether we are going to get a solution to the sugar problem in this country.
And his eyes just brightened.
That's a kind of Kenya that I would like to see.
There's something wrong with his eyes.
I think he's just inviting me. He's inviting me to say the following.
Our time is up.
Can he respond? Is he going to?
Yes, he's inviting me. Rotich is involved. Adan is involved. Balala is involved. Cecily Kariuki is involved, Fred Matiang'i is involved. There are far too many. So we should be asking either the president to dissolve the cabinet, or if he doesn't want to dissolve the cabinet, the government should actually accept that it's unable to run the public affairs of Kenya, so that we go for fresh elections.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bwana Wamatangi.
Yes. Even Bwana Wamatangi. Even Bwana Wamatangi. You know, yesterday I got into traffic. I got stuck, so I decided to take a boda from Kenyatta Market to Lavington.
You actually did?
Yes, I did. And then as I was in traffic, you know, a guy saw me on a boda. He alighted from his. I said, "Watch, so many pick your picture, man."
Did he?
So,
it should be trending by now.
So I mean, Bwana Matangi will do. Now, you know, Fred, it is true that there are times when indeed some committees in Parliament, even parliamentarians, have been used to foster wars, you know, against certain people or even cabinet secretaries. That's also a reality, because it's politics, as you've said, and we have to say that is wrong, even because you have to be honest and frank about the reality of life, and that sometimes happens. It is wrong. Indeed, at this particular time, it is my firm belief, as a senator elected in Kenya, that what we have in cabinet does not warrant, or is not time either to call for a reshuffle or even undo the cabinet. If there is 1, 2, 3, 4 people who have been mentioned or who need to clear the names, what they just need to do is to clear the names. I would want to say to any of my colleagues across the body, in the National Assembly, in the Senate, in our committees, let's be fair. I mean, we've been given the opportunity to legislate such that we ensure that it is justice for the people that prevails, you know, and not finger pointing or trying to indict people, you know, for the wrong reasons. But as far as I know, and the work that we have done, either in the Committee of Public Accounts or any other, we have been forthright, we have been clear, we have been completely dispassionate about the truth, which is bringing to the people what belongs to them, justice.
Yeah. And the president should actually borrow from the work of Parliament. Finally, Senator.
Yes, I want to say just two things. Thing one, let's leave politics out of education. Let's leave politics out of schools. Let us treat our children and schools as hallowed grounds. Hallowed grounds where when you're making decisions, they are well-reasoned decisions. They are not decisions for political expediencies or decisions that will make us look good politically. And thing two, the cabinet is dysfunctional. Senator Matangi maybe looks at it differently. But this cabinet, if you look at the past World Cup, it is like Argentina. It has got stars, but it cannot work together to string goals and to win any competition.
Wow.
Kenyans want a cabinet that will be like Croatia, that has got the spirit, that has got the passion, that has got
fewer
the determination.
Stars. Yes.
Fewer stars, but everyone working together for the good of Kenyans. And that is my message to President Uhuru Kenyatta.
Could not have been said better. Thank you so much, Senator Moses Kajwang of Homa Bay County, Boni Halwale, Deputy Party Leader, Ford Kenya, and Kimani Wamatangi, Senator Kiambu, helping us look at the issues behind the headlines. We've talked about the sugar and the politics surrounding this sugar debate and the illegal importation of sugar. Next up, Wahiga Mora will be sitting down with biochemist Dr. Catherine Kunyanga